What's up, everybody? Today we're going to dive into Michael Brecker's incredible solo on I Mean You from McCoy Tyner's 1995 record, Infinity. We'll take a look at 6 specific concepts and break down the melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic devices that make this solo so great. That way, you can head to the practice room and develop vocabulary that you can use in your own playing. Doesn't that sound so much better than learning licks out of a book? Let's start by listening to one phrase at a time. The audio is filtered to avoid any copyright triggers, but you can still hear the solo. Here's phrase 1. Here's phrase 2. Here's phrase 3. Phrase 4 is a bit longer. And I would consider this to be a part of this phrase. It's sort of like an answer to this ba-bu-da, bu-da-bu-da. Then we have this really long lick, the sort of hero phrase of the solo. Then we get these 3 micro phrases. And then the last phrase of the chorus. That's our Triad Pairs. So some cool stuff about the phrasing in this solo. Well, first let's number these. Counting these 3 as one group. 7 phrases making up this chorus. Some things to note. The first 3 phrases are 4 bars long. And the 4th phrase is a little longer, taking us into the bridge. Here's where the bridge starts. These double lines, I'm going to tell you where the 8-bar sections are. So that's A, B, and then the last A section is here. So this phrase takes us into the bridge with this nice rhythmic motif. Boom, ba-ba-da, ba-da-ba-da. The 5th phrase is definitely the longest. 7 bars with this really burning double time line. That line definitely does have its own section of this video later on. Another thing that's worth noting here is this last phrase, ba 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 da, kind of echoes this. Ba 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 da ba ba. So that, kind of thing gives the solo some cohesion and unity. So a big takeaway from this solo is that we should be aware of our phrase lengths. 3 times is often the perfect amount of repetitions, and we hear Brecker play these 3 4-bar phrases, and then after that insane double time lick, we get 3 1-bar phrases, giving the solo this really great compositional balance. Each phrase also has this kind of call and response structure built in. None of these phrases trail off or only contain one musical device. And the last bar of each of these phrases has a surprising motif that almost acts like a punctuation mark. Come here for a sec. Could you do me a huge favor? If you're liking the video so far, go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment letting me know who your favorite saxophone player is. Let's get a fresh sheet out to talk about range. So Brecker boldly starts the solo on a high G, and this first phrase spans 2 octaves, taking us all the way down to low E. The next phrase hangs out around this G, and then takes us down to a low F. The next 2 phrases have a similar ascending, descending shape. But again, phrase 4 takes us all the way to altissimo G and ends with this low B resolving to low C riff. So again, the entire range of the instrument. But all of these phrases so far essentially start either high or in the middle of the instrument and end lower than they started. Then the first phrase of the solo that starts low and ends high is this long double time lick, which takes us from low C all the way up to the altissimo G at the end of the phrase. Then we get 3 small descending phrases, and the very last phrase of the solo is kind of winding. It's this triad pair pattern that goes up and down. For me, the big takeaway here is that we can use the whole range of that instrument, even in the first phrase of the solo. You don't always have to save it, even though that can work as well. It can be really exciting as a listener to hear these giant phrases that span the whole range of the instrument. Of course, a prerequisite is that we need to have a good sound and intonation across the entire range of the instrument. No one wants to hear that if the high notes sound whiny and sharp and the low notes are barely honking out. You can check out my videos on long tones and overtone exercises if that's something you're interested in working on. I even have a free PDF of exercises on my website, so check that out as well. Now, a lot of intermediate saxophonists suffer from eighth note itis, where you really want to play your diminished patterns you've been practicing and they just come out as eighth notes, because that's what you practiced. So in this solo, only one phrase, the fifth phrase, starts with eighth notes, which would be this section right here. All the other eighth note lines start and end with specific rhythmic ideas. Check out this rhythmic rhyme on Brecker's first two phrases, where we get beat 3, beat 1, beat 3, beat 1. First phrase ends bam ba dam ba dam. Great rhythm here. Bam ba da da. Similar shape to this line, but now it's 16th notes. There's another nice one here on bar 17 and 18. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4. That sounds great, and it gives the phrase this kind of call and response structure, a binary structure. Brecker uses triplets 3 or 4 times in this solo, and it's always at the beginning of a phrase, which I thought was interesting. There's this time with the triplets, there's this triplet, there's the beginning of this phrase, there's this triplet lick here, and then this, you might call this a triplet, but it's really just part of a longer run. This rhythmic device, 1 and then an eighth rest, 1 and 1 and, that's called the Charleston rhythm, and he uses it in this phrase, he uses it in this phrase, and we've covered pretty much every rhythm now that is not eighth note lines. We need to pay as much attention to rhythmic concepts as we do to hip harmonic devices. You can try improvising using a specific rhythmic template, for example. Find a rhythm that you like in a solo, maybe even a 2-part kind of thing that has a call and response structure built in, and practice using just that rhythmic motif over some changes that you know, using all kinds of different harmonic and melodic language within that rhythmic context. Over time, you'll start to do this naturally. Fourths and fifth bass language. Brecker uses a lot of larger intervals in this solo in addition to scales and thirds, which are the bread and butter of most Western music. On bars 17 and 18, we have this cool motif, which uses the leaps between the 7th and 11th E flat and B flat as an approach to the 9th G, which we can also think of as the major triad off the 7th of the chord. That's E flat major triad over F7. This is followed by the sharp 11 and the root approaching the 5th, B natural and F, resolving to C. Bar 19 starts with an F triad followed by some very typical chordal language, D, G, C, F. And this is just an enclosure to this chord tone, which resolves down to the 7th of the next chord. Chordal lines like this are a huge part of McCoy Tyner's harmony, where he plays fourths and fifths in the left hand. Start by practicing the circle of fourths in stacks of 3 or 4 notes, ascending and descending. Then you can look for places where these groups of notes fit over various harmonies. For example, in A minor, we can play B, E, A, and D to outline the 9th, 5th, root, and 4th of the key. That's 2 colorful notes and 2 notes which define the key we're in. Then you have to practice getting in and out of this shape, inverting it. The possibilities are endless. This chorus ends with a nice triad pair lick, using the major triad a half step above and below the home key. So we're in G, and we have a G outlined here, G, A, B, D. That's 1, 2, 3, 5. Then we have an A flat triad, an F sharp triad, and an A flat triad. So that's 1, 2, 3, 5. This is 5, 3, 1, 5. 5, 1, 3, 5 in this key, 3, 1, 5, 3, resolving to the 5th of the home key. So, very typical triad lick, but just executed in a way that sounds really nice, wraps up this chorus, and takes us home. Triad pairs really deserve their own video, and I made one, so check that as a starting point. But basically, once you learn what they sound like, you can always find new harmonic uses for them. In this case, Brecker is slipping in and out of the key, creating tension and then resolving it. We could use this same pair of 2 major triads a whole step apart in a lot of different harmonic scenarios. For example, over G, a G major and A major triad gives us a Lydian sound. Over E, that gives us a Dorian minor sound. Over B, it gives us a natural minor sound. Over D flat, it's all the good altered notes. The flat 5, the 7, the flat 9, the sharp 5, the root, and the sharp 9. Now let's break down this double time bebop line in the middle of the chorus. On this sheet I have it spaced out a little more so we can annotate the notes a little easier. Of course, the high-speed execution of this is amazing, and it will probably take several practice sessions just to get this part up to speed. But every measure of this contains very common bebop language that we can take apart and integrate into our playing and use in other scenarios, rather than just trying to copy and paste these 5 bars. Let's look at this section right here. Because bop language uses so many chromatic pitches, a good starting point is to examine the notes on the strong beats. We're still on an E flat 7 here, so this is the 9th, the 7th, and the 5th, outlining the chord. The connective tissue here is chromatic scale, and then this we can call an enclosure landing on the 5th. Pretty much any well-conceived bop language can be broken down into scales, arpeggios, and enclosures. Let's look at the next measure. Here's another enclosure taking us to this G. Now, we're on a D7, and G, or the 4th scale degree, the 11th of the chord, is sometimes thought of as an avoid tone, which is not a nomenclature or teaching thing that I agree with, because there's usually a purpose for it, and in this case, what Michael Brecker is doing is he's treating this D7 as an A minor D7. So replacing the 5 with a 2-5. Very commonly done on extended dominant chords, like when we have 2 bars, just like on the bridge of rhythm changes. You can always find this by saying which 2 chord always goes with a dominant chord, and it's a 4th below. So A minor is a 4th below D7. We outline this chord, 7, 5, 3, 1. Then this is the bebop scale, 3, 2, 1, 7, the natural 7, and the lowered 7th. So the bebop scale is not really a scale on its own. We practice it like it's a scale, but what it really is just a passing tone. And like we saw up here earlier, all notes can be passing tones. We wouldn't call this the bebop scale, there's an E natural. But passing tones just have their place in the language. So it's a little bit of an oversimplification to say that this is the only bebop passing tone. They're all valid passing tones if you use them correctly. Then we just have scale, and again an enclosure, dun, 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 taking us to the 5th, and then just more scale up to the 7th. This phrase closes out with altered scale, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, to the 3rd. Look at that. It's really all about voice leading, guys. If the line sounds good, it's probably because it resolves to these important chord tones. The 9th, the 7th, the 5th. In this case, a substitution, A minor to D7. It's not really a substitution, you're just implying the 2 with the 5. And again, an enclosure. So these are really just the bread and butter of the bebop language, but it sounds awesome because it's played so well, and also because it ends with this run up to the altissimo G. We hit that note 3 times in this chorus. It's the very first note, it's almost the last note of the chorus, and 1 time in passing in this phrase that we talked about earlier. So you can take all of these individual pieces, these granular little bits of the phrases in a line like this, practice them in all 12 keys, put them together in new ways, understand what makes them tick, and it's usually these very simple concepts of diatonic scales, passing tones, arpeggios that make a lot of sense over the chord, and enclosures. A really good starting point is just looking at the downbeats. I was lucky enough to take a lesson with Melissa Aldana during quarantine. She was teaching some lessons online, and she said one of her favorite ways to analyze a solo was to look at where the downbeats are, and that stuff always makes sense. It's the harmony is really outlined, and everything else between, I like to think of it as connective tissue, and it's what gives the line its its feeling and its speed. But really, there's so many ways to get from the 3rd of a chord to the 7th of the chord, and you can learn all those different ways by studying really great bebop lines like this. Now, of course, being able to play runs with this much melodic cohesion at a tempo like this takes a lot of slow, deliberate practice. After absorbing some of this material, try putting together lines of your own starting at 60 beats per minute. When you can get through 8 bars with good voice leading over one chord, thinking about this type of 2-5-1 language, only then should you increase the tempo. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into this Michael Brecker solo. It's one of my favorite Brecker solos of all time. And if you'd like to see more theory and practice-oriented videos like this, let me know. I really had a good time making it. Do me a favor, subscribe, like, and leave a comment letting me know which of these devices you found the most interesting to practice, or if you'd like to see more information on. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.